Hello everyone, welcome to Star Psych, and today I'm going to talk about some of the fundamental differences between the INTP and the ENTP personality types. This is one of those combinations of two types that people often mistype between, especially if they're newer to MBTI and they don't understand the fundamental differences in how these types work based on their cognitive functions. So I'm going to go over their cognitive functions and how they portray themselves and the differences between these two types in their cognitive functions, even though they have the same cognitive functions, they're just in a different order. Let's get into it. So both of the NTP types have introverted thinking, extroverted intuition, introverted sensing, and extroverted feeling. The difference between the INTP and the ENTP is that the INTP leads with introverted thinking and has secondary extroverted intuition, while the ENTP leads with extroverted intuition and has secondary introverted thinking. Now, the primary difference that is going to come from this is that despite the fact that both of them are P types, or they have a P at the end of their personality code, one of them is actually a judging dominant type, and that's going to be the INTP, because the INTP leads with introverted thinking, and introverted thinking is a judging function. Well, what does this mean for the INTP compared to the ENTP? Well, it means that the INTP is usually going to be far more decided as opposed to the ENTP, who leads with a perceiving function, an irrational function. So this means that when the INTP is coming to conclusions, they're trying to decide on things, they're trying to think of a solution, when they reach that solution, they're far more likely to have heavily thought it out, and they're more likely to want to stick with that single thought, solution, or answer if possible, as opposed to the ENTP. Both types have high extroverted intuition, which means that they're usually going to be people who like change, or they like to be in environments that allow them to not have to do the same thing, especially mentally, for extended periods of time. This is going to be even more so true with the ENTP as opposed to the INTP. One of the greatest gifts of the INTP, a type that leads with introverted thinking, is that they are going to put a lot of time and effort into usually one, maybe two topics that are really interesting to them, and they're going to have an exceptional amount of depth related to their knowledge on that specific topic. You'll find that with ENTPs who also prefer depth-style learning because of introverted thinking, that they're going to be similar, but because of their preference for extroverted intuition over introverted thinking, they're usually going to be more prone to jumping around and trying to learn about as many topics as they possibly can, while also trying to maintain that depth of learning. And this can seem kind of counterintuitive at first, because if you're changing topics really quickly, if you're trying to learn new things, how can you learn them deeply? And I think that's actually one of the unique gifts of the ENTP personality type, is that they can actually manage to learn lots of new different skills and abilities and things quite quickly because of their extroverted intuition and introverted thinking. One major issue that both of these types are usually going to struggle with is bringing their tasks to completion or finishing a single project, and they're actually going to struggle with this for two very different reasons because of their type. The INTP tends to struggle to finish things or move on from whatever it is that they're working on because they're usually going to be people who want to just keep learning, essentially, or keep diving into one topic, do as much as they can, learn as much as they can. They're not as much interested in the implementation process, which is why they can sometimes get stuck in this learning paralysis where they just keep learning and they keep studying and they keep trying to understanding until they feel like they can come to a perfect conclusion. And a lot of times that's not always going to be something that is possible. Now, ENTPs, on the other hand, often struggle with finishing projects or getting things accomplished because they like to go from thing to thing. And it's hard to, achieve something, it's hard to finish something if you're not going to allow yourself enough time to actually finish it. Now, that doesn't mean that either of these types can't achieve or finish things. It just means this is one of the common struggles that both of these types typically face in their developmental process, and it's something that they have to be consciously aware of if they want to do something like finish a major project, come up with an idea, and actually implement it. They have to be aware of the things and the processes that are involved in making sure that you can actually finish the project, as opposed to just either getting stuck in this learning style, this learning process, or getting stuck in this position where you're going to be changing from thing to thing over and over again. The tertiary function actually plays a big part in the differences between these two types, because each type's tertiary function is the other type's last or repressed function. And the tertiary function is actually something that someone can be relatively skilled at if they put in the effort and the thought and they make sure that they're working on this function throughout their lifespan. While as the repressed function is typically something that's never going to be close to a level of mastery, and it's always going to be this thing that weighs us down, or we have to be very consciously aware of how it's going to be negatively impacting us and our life. So the INTP has tertiary introverted sensing, And this function, combined with their dominant introverted thinking, is what allows them to be one of the most detail-focused types of all the personality types. They're one of the unique types that has this ability, alongside types like the ISFJ, who also have SI and TI in their dominant kind of attitude. So what's interesting about the INTP is this TI and SI, which gives them the ability to make sure not only are they completely understanding something, but they're making sure that they pay attention to the details in doing so. The ENTP, on the other hand, is going to struggle with this because the ENTP has repressed introverted sensing. So when it comes to being aware of the details, they can often be off-put by this because they're so excited about the idea or the thing that they're working on that sometimes they skip over the semantics or the little things that could block them from really doing what they want to do. Now, for the INTP and the ENTP, the tertiary function for the ENTP, on the other hand, is extroverted feeling, which is the INTP's repressed function. Now, the INTP is notorious for having struggles with kind of clear and easy social communication. And this comes from the lack of extroverted feeling or lack of strong or healthy extroverted feeling, repressed extroverted feeling. So the INTP is quite notorious for maybe doing something that's called putting their foot in their mouth in conversation, or saying things that had intention that they didn't exactly mean. While the ENTP, on the other hand, can actually be quite smooth, and I think ENTPs can be very good with people, again, if they put in that effort and they actually work on this function. It's something that you don't typically see with younger ENTPs, but I find that once they get into their 20s and 30s, that extroverted feeling tends to really blossom, and they can be actually quite charismatic in their communication style. But they don't have the same type of charisma that you would see with an extroverted feeling top 2 type. I think that ENTPs tend to have more of a trickster type of charisma. I always say that the fictional character Loki is likely an ENTP, and you can see that type of charisma in those types of characters. It's very fluid and moving. It's not something that's going to be as charming, I would say, as maybe some of the extroverted feeling top 2s that have that more natural approach to charisma, whereas the ENTP has this more fluid approach. ENTPs also tend to like to have a little bit more fun with their introverted thinking, as opposed to the INTP, who often treats their introverted thinking thoughts very deeply and on a personal level. It is subjective thinking, after all. Introverted thinking as a introverted function is subjective, so they hold their thoughts and opinions very close to themselves, and as an introverted type, it's going to be something that's even more personal to them. And this is why you'll find that ENTPs are often very comfortable with things like playing the devil's advocate and jumping between topics and opinions and trying to find the depth in all of them. Whereas you'll find that the INTP can do this, but they're more prone to want to really stick to and try to understand one thing and then maybe explore the possibilities within that one thing that they're looking at, instead of trying to find the TI depth in a lot of different perspectives and then trying to maybe form some sort of greater conclusion from those different perspectives. The INTP is far more likely to say, this is the one thing that I really want to deeply understand, and I'm going to put a lot of time and effort into trying to deeply understand it. So those are the major differences between the ENTP and the INTP. The big things are, again, that INTPs are a judging dominant type, while ENTPs are a perceiving dominant type. INTPs are going to be far more decided, while ENTPs tend to be far more sporadic and driven by energy and interest. INTPs are often quite interested in topics as well, but it's more so of a depth interest as opposed to ENTPs, who like to find the depth in multiple things. So if you're struggling with any of these two types or the differentiations between these two types, feel free to leave a question down in the comment section below. I will try to answer it and try to differentiate a concern that you may have between these two types. Other than that, I would like to remind people that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website at asuraPsych.com if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Asura from Asura Psych. Have a good one.